So I posted one of my wife's videos in my community tab a little while back, and after that, a few of you reached out to me to ask about what it was like to come out of evangelical Christianity as a married couple. So I thought that I might as well bring my wife on my channel and we could tell you guys that story together.
For those who don't know me yet, I'm Taylor. I'm Drew's wife. I run the channel The Anti-Bot, and we've been married, about 7 years now?
About 7 years. I think that some people are going to be shocked that we've been married that long. They'll be like, Drew, you got married when you were 13? No.
Yeah, we got married kind of young, but not that young.
I mean, okay, so getting married at 21 is pretty normal in deep evangelical culture. So where we were at the time, it wasn't that weird.
Yeah, it wasn't that weird.
I thought we could start this out with describing how we were raised. As a lot of you guys know, I was raised independent fundamental Baptist, so we were quite conservative. We were biblical literalists. I was a young earth creationist. I thought the earth was only about 6,000 years old, and I loved Kent Hovind. There was also a lot of restrictions about music and media and substances. Like, we believed it was a sin to drink alcohol. We basically didn't think that dancing was okay in a lot of instances, and I wasn't allowed to consume media like Harry Potter or Pokemon, and the media that I was exposed to outside of that was curated a little more heavily by my parents.
I was raised non-denominational, but we were more Baptist leaning. I think most of the doctrines of the non-denominational churches I went to probably align with the Baptist church that you grew up with. But I was not raised as like legalistic or as fundamentalist as you were. We were allowed to, or I was allowed to listen to pretty much any music I wanted to, watch any media I wanted to. There weren't really that many rules around that. And my situation was a little bit different. I grew up around people that had a lot of different backgrounds and came from a lot of different denominations. So there were some people I was around that were literalists, and then there were some people that weren't. And I didn't have like a strong opinion either way about that. It wasn't really something that would shake my faith if I learned that science contradicted something in the Bible. I was kind of okay with some things being metaphorical. So that was a little bit of a difference between you and I.
Yeah. Ultimately, though, we agreed on what we thought were the most important theological issues. I mean, if you don't receive salvation by accepting Jesus Christ into your heart, into your life as your personal Lord and Savior, then you will go to hell. I looked at hell as this very literal lake of fire where you will be tortured forever. You look at hell.
I saw it more as just eternal disconnection from God. I didn't think it was like a literal fire or that it was going to be like this literal pain. That's not exactly how I saw it.
So theological disagreements were minor enough for us that we didn't have any problems when we were getting together with any of that. We agreed on everything we thought was important.
Yeah.
Now, we dated for a few years before we got married. When we got married, I had changed my views a little bit. I was still a Christian, definitely, but I wasn't a fundamentalist at all. I was definitely at least as non-legalist or liberal as you were, but I was starting to think for myself a little bit. I started to think, I think that evolution may very well be true. I'm not so sure if personal spiritual experiences with Jesus can really be trusted as evidence for his existence. And the main thing that I really changed my mind on was I just didn't think that being gay was wrong at that point. It was right before Obergefell v. Hodges, and I was just like, it's completely ludicrous that gay people aren't given the exact same rights as everyone else here. It's not a sin, and completely beside that, it should be legal in the U.S.
When we got married, my faith hadn't really changed that much. I think that I kind of adhered to what I believed as a kid. Nothing had really changed. Even as a kid, I was much more like being gay is okay. I think I probably said to people that I thought it was a sin, but I really didn't. And I was definitely all for like gay marriage.
Yeah.
When we actually got married on the day that gay marriage was legalized, and we kind of like that now. So.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy. On our wedding night, we get back to the hotel and we look on our phones and are like, it's legal now.
Yeah.
Like the Supreme Court case, like just deemed it legal. This is crazy. And we were like really happy, but also trying not to say like, oh, I'm really happy about it. Because we hadn't really talked that much about the fact
I feel like I think we were both like, oh, really? Like we knew each other were happy about it.
We were like, I remember trying to be a bit reserved about it because I was supposed to be like a spiritual leader or whatever, but we were happy about that.
Yeah.
Now, about 5 or 6 months after Taylor and I got married, my questions and my doubts really started to bubble up a lot more. They got to the point where I really just couldn't ignore them anymore. I wasn't very vocal about that with Taylor because we were so busy with school. I mean, it was my last semester of college. I was graduating. I was working on getting a job. Taylor was still in school, and I didn't want to have another problem to deal with, basically. So I kept it pretty much to myself around that time. I didn't think that we would break up if I said something like I was questioning things or I had some doubts. If I got to the point where I left Christianity, though, I really wasn't sure. I was afraid that Taylor would think it would be wrong to be with me and then would just leave. So I was hesitant to speak up.
Around the same time that I think that you started having questions about your faith, you and I both were starting to look into MLMs and seeing how cult-like they were. Because your family had gotten super involved with Young Living, which is an essential oils MLM. Yeah. And we both noticed that a lot of the arguments that your family would give or people in general would give for why you should join Young Living were the same arguments people used for Christianity. Yeah. And in my mind, I was starting to connect some of the dots there. I remember we went on a walk in a park. Yeah. I think that was near your family's home one day. And we were talking about Young Living.
And specifically about how essential oils, the people argue for essential oils. Like they use these spiritual experiences with essential oils, these personal experiences with essential oils, saying, oh, I know that essential oils work and I know that God is connected to them and I know X, Y, and Z about essential oils because I had a personal experience with them. I rubbed them on my knee and it got all better. And so that means that essential oils are this incredible cure-all.
Yeah, that's the main thing that I think people use to try to get people involved in MLM is personal experience because there's no data that they can use. It's just personal experience. So I remember asking you, I was like, we obviously can see how using personal experience to justify MLMs is kind of dumb. Yeah. And I was like, but why do we use that for faith and it's okay? And I think I remember you saying like, well, God's in a different category. That type of rationale is okay for God, but not for anything else. Yeah. And I remember feeling like that kind of satisfied me in the moment because it just gave me that little bit of reassurance. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to question that then. I'm not going to go there. Yeah. But I still did know, well, that's not exactly like a satisfying answer. I still feel like there's something there, but we kind of didn't go further with that conversation at the time.
And I remember giving you that answer because I was uncomfortable with going any further. I had doubts a little bit beyond that, but that was something I was really seriously wrestling with at that time. Yeah. And you asking so specifically about it kind of scared me or insightful about it and I felt like could see right through me. And I wanted to leave it there because I wasn't ready. Yeah. So yeah, the answer was a cop-out on my part. And I hope that you consider that uncharacteristic of me. But I don't know. I think it was about a month later, maybe a little more than that I eventually did come to you and say that I was doubting quite a bit and that I wasn't really sure if I could consider myself a Christian anymore. And I was kind of more like in an agnostic kind of place. I hadn't come to conclusions or something. I didn't feel sure about Christianity at all anymore. And I had a lot of questions about it. I remember saying to you that regardless of whether I was a Christian or you were a Christian or whatever, that didn't matter to me. I just wanted to be with you. You were my highest priority and beliefs were irrelevant. So like you don't need to worry if I am not a Christian, or if you are or you're not, whatever,
Yeah.
I still want to be with you.
Yeah. The day that you first told me, I was very, very upset. And I wasn't necessarily like mad at you, but I had just been taught my entire life that if you're married to someone who's not a believer, then you're unequally yoked, and like a marriage can only survive if you have Christ at the center. And I was thinking like, oh no, like our marriage is going to crumble now because we don't both believe in God, or we're not both Christians. But that really only lasted a day or two, because I realized nothing had really changed about our relationship.
Yeah.
You still treated me the same. Our communication was the same. So after that, I was still concerned, but not like super upset or anything. And I remember telling you to go talk to our astronomy professor at the college we went to, because he was a very intelligent scientist, but was also a Christian.
Yeah.
And so I wanted you to go and talk to him about it, which now I feel is not the best approach for someone who's deconstructing or questioning their faith, because you're basically telling someone to, well, you need to go talk to a Christian and you need to surround yourself with more Christians. But I don't think it was necessarily the worst advice, because he is a very smart person.
Oh, yeah,
and I think
absolutely.
even talking to him now is still a good idea.
Yeah.
But I think I probably should have said, go talk to this teacher, but also talk to people that have different beliefs or that are atheists, and kind of that can help you determine what you do or do not believe.
Yeah. You know, something really funny is that I know of another person who went to the same school as us and went through the same deconversion process that I did after that taking astronomy from the same professor. And he actually went and spoke to the professor, and the professor basically said, yeah, Christianity is about faith. Like, if you're looking for a scientific answer from me, I don't have one, because Christianity is not about science. It's about faith. I mean, my science is completely separate from Christianity, which is why I'm not a young earther, which is why I believe the actual scientific consensus.
Which probably caused a little controversy for him in the college.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of people that were young earth creationists.
But that to say, I don't know that me talking to the guy would have held me in the faith any longer. Because if I would have heard that, it probably would have sped things along. Because I would have been like, I don't want to just believe because I believe. I want to believe for good reasons.
Yeah.
Now, I was upset by Taylor's initial reaction of like, oh no, what's going to happen now? Like, this might break us up. And I'm thinking, no, it won't, unless we just decide that it will.
Yeah, like you're still the same person.
Yeah. But I remember waking up in bed the next morning and she's not there. And I'm like, oh no, she's gone. Like, she left. But then she came back into the apartment and was like, hey, I went to Starbucks. And then came to me immediately and said that, like, I'm sorry for being harsh and I still love you and we'll figure it out, basically. And so I felt a lot more secure after that. I thought that me talking to her about this was going to be a lot worse than it was.
Yeah.
Now, of course, with everything we were raised with, it makes perfect sense that you were concerned. I mean, if the situation would have been reversed, I would have been really afraid that, oh no, like the spiritual blessing is going to just wear off and like magic, our relationship's going to be terrible all of a sudden. But yeah, you saw that wasn't the case very, very quickly. And we're like, oh,
yeah,
okay. So yeah, you were.
It's not to say I was like thrilled or something at first, but I wasn't like going to divorce you.
You were very reasonable, is how I would put it. A few months after this, I was totally out of Christianity, and I let you know I don't consider myself a Christian. I'm like kind of in an agnostic, maybe atheist type place, but I'm not a Christian anymore. And obviously that's significant. I decided though, and I'm not sure if I directly said this to you or if it was an unspoken thing or what, but I decided I'm not going to try to argue with you or influence you to think how I do, because it's a really, really big deal to stop being a Christian with how we were raised.
Yeah.
And if you were going to go through that, which would probably be painful, both just internally and socially, then it needed to be completely your own thing. I didn't want to like leverage my position with you to convince you of what I believe. It would also be contradicting myself when I originally told you, I don't care, if you're a Christian or not, I'm still going to love you. So I felt no motivation to try to convince you. You treated me well regardless. So who cares? That said, there was another reason why I didn't want to try to convince you or even argue with you or provide you resources for what I was thinking at all. And that was, before we got married, I was coached quite a bit by loved ones telling me, Drew, I know that you're very hands-off with your spiritual leadership with Taylor. I know you're not married yet, but, the way that I look at it now is you treat Taylor as an equal and you don't expect her to follow you or listen to what you say just because you're a man.
And even as Christians, we had a very different dynamic than a lot of people in our marriage. I had the stereotypical male role and male job.
Yeah.
And you were working with people and children, which is seen more as a womanly job, I guess.
At that time, I also cooked more.
Yeah. So in the Christian sense, our roles were reversed.
Yeah. That was not directly criticized, but people were saying, Drew, you need to be a more firm spiritual leader. You need to be making the decisions about where you're going to church. You need to be making the decisions about your denomination. You need to make sure that your wife is in church and your wife is doing X, Y, and Z and that your wife believes X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, because I can't do it myself.
Yeah, I mean...
or make those decisions for myself.
I told her either the first day or the first week that we got married, I'm not going to do that because you're not a child and I expect you to be able to make decisions and think for yourself. You obviously can, or else I wouldn't be marrying you.
Yeah, and I mean, you didn't even have to say that. That was already the dynamic in our relationship.
Right. But now that I was not a Christian, I realized that there'd be a huge double standard, right? So I stopped being a Christian first, and then if Taylor just got more liberal with her theology, or if she became a non-Christian, whatever, it would have been completely my doing, and I was overbearing, and I forced that on her because I'm a man and she's a woman. Never mind the fact that forcing my views about religion and theology on her was encouraged when we were Christians, but I knew that it would be demonized if it was the reverse.
Yeah, I felt like I was in a bit of a situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because for me, it's if I decide to reassess my faith or take a look at my faith, then everyone's going to see it as, oh, I'm just following what Drew's doing. I'm just reassessing my faith because I'm trying to make our marriage work. But then if I don't do that and I just don't question my Christianity at all, then it's well, now you're unequally yoked to an unbeliever, and that's bad too. So the only option would be to leave you, which I obviously did not want to do. So again, it kind of just, these situations, it pushes you into a corner where nothing you decide to do is the right thing.
Several months after this, so about a year after our first conversation where I was saying, I don't really know if I'm a Christian anymore, I'm not really sure, we realized that we just couldn't keep where I was spiritually from my parents anymore. We talked about spiritual stuff all the time. We talked about going to church. We prayed all the time. It was impossible to cover it up. And so we decided to go to my parents' house and tell them everything. I told them that I was an agnostic or atheist, depending on how you want to cut it, and they argue with me about it, but were very interested in what Taylor believed. And I mean, from what I remember, your main answer was, this conversation isn't about me at all, and I didn't prepare to come here and talk about it. But I think that you did hint that you were an agnostic Christian, agnostic theist. You were a Christian, and that's what you're comfortable with, but you had a lot more questions. You were a lot more open than before. I don't think you stated a specific position.
Yeah.
You were more just I'm more open.
Yeah, I think that I probably said I still call myself a Christian, but I'm working through things,
Yeah,
or I'm
something
looking
like
into
that.
things. I remember that being the state that I was in, so I think that's probably what I said.
But again, that conversation was about where I was at. It wasn't supposed to have anything to do with you. But at certain points, you were put in the middle. Like, Drew, why are you trying to influence her out of Christianity? And I told them, no, I'm not trying to do that. Actually, specifically refrain from arguing with her. I don't listen to like atheist podcasts or something around her. I don't recommend books to her. It's totally her journey to have. I don't think it's my place to try to influence her there.
But still, you can't escape people's assumptions, or people just want to believe so badly that you're influencing me.
Yeah.
Or I'm just doing things because that's what you're doing, and I'm trying to keep our marriage work. And I'm sure there's going to be comments to this video of people saying that. It's inescapable.
All that to say, we accurately predicted that this double standard would be in play, and it was quite frustrating. Now, this conversation consisted of an hours-long debate, and at the end of it was like, look, Drew, we don't have any arguments that are going to convince you. You're going to be able to knock down our arguments, whatever. So we're not going to try to argue with you about it anymore, at least today. But you are going to come back to Christianity at some point. Like, you're too smart not to, or something. I'm not really sure. But you're going to come back to Christianity. We're sure of it. And, just give it time. Very quickly after this, I think that it was pretty much exactly a month, I posted my first few videos on this channel. I started it because, I wasn't talking to Taylor about all the things that I was learning about and thinking and how my beliefs were changing. And I didn't have any friends at all that weren't Christian. The only people that knew at that point were Taylor and my parents. That's all. So I'm a talker. Anytime I have an idea or like a script or whatever, anything, I have to come to you and be like, can I bounce this off of you?
Yeah, you have to process things verbally.
Yeah. And it was just really difficult for me without being able to do that. So I started my channel so that I could do that. I was quite caught off guard with how fast I gained a following. I think about a month after I started my channel, I had one of my videos shared by Hemet Meta, and it got me to 1,000 subscribers in like a couple days after that share. And yeah, I just didn't expect that. I kept going. I really, really liked making videos. It became very important to me. And eventually I was at about 5,000 subscribers, but then I collaborated with Cosmic Skeptic, and that collab with Alex got me to 10,000 subscribers within like the week following that collab. So making videos became a very big deal for me very, very quickly. I think 6 months after I started my channel, I had 10K. With it being such a big part of my life, it became very difficult to cover up the fact that I was an atheist, and like a vocal one at that point. None of my friends knew, again. None of our family knew except for my parents, again. And so it became quite the chore to, tear down my studio every time someone came over, to cover up any artifact of video stuff. I had to go get my camera and like put it in the closet, all that kind of thing. And there were just, even when I would be missing from some activity that Taylor and I were going to do with other people because I was working on videos, Taylor had to tell them I was doing something that I wasn't. And you are the worst liar ever. Taylor can't keep a straight face. And so it was really difficult.
Yeah. It was hard it was like a lot of things I felt like I had to manage. And I think the thing that people maybe don't realize is when you're a married couple and one's deconstructing their faith, it's harder to deal with other people's reactions and perceptions than it is to deal with just what's going on between the two of you. Yeah. I think that was the hardest thing for us, was having to manage and deal with other people's reactions.
Yeah, because we really had no conflict over this. I let you do your thing, you let me do my thing. We loved each other unconditionally, and so it really wasn't a problem. But problems arose with how other people responded. And it just got to the point where you were very, very much caught in the middle when it came to my channel and then with our family and friends.
So I always get a little bit freaked out when I'm trying to think of how I'm going to explain my deconstruction story, because I think my story is kind of boring. It's a little bit mundane. It wasn't like, oh, I thought of this and then I realized that I didn't believe in God anymore. It was more a process that took several years. So I feel like my story isn't that interesting, but I've realized that that's actually a good thing, because I think when you're reassessing something that's as big as your fundamental beliefs about the universe, it should take you a while for you to consider everything. And I think that's kind of the problem with the church, is that people who have this overnight revival and pledge their life to Christ after hearing one sermon, the church praises people for doing that. And that's actually not a good thing. You should be taking your time to consider everything before you come to a conclusion. And even now, I still regularly reevaluate my beliefs. I'm still in that process of deconstructing. I think for you, something that kind of led you out of Christianity was learning about science. And kind of as I talked about in the beginning of the video, that wasn't really something that would shake my faith. What really started my process of deconstruction was realizing that faith is not a reliable method for determining truth. People can use faith, like I just believe because I believe, to justify anything. And I think that when it comes down to it, most apologetics is, well, you just have to have faith. Also, I realized that God choosing literature to convey such an important message to people was kind of not a good method to use, because literature is open to interpretation and people do interpret the Bible in many different ways. So it's kind of impossible to know what God meant if you're just reading words on a page.
Right. Now, if I can interject here, I have mentioned that on my channel before, and the overwhelming response I've gotten from the apologetics community in multiple response videos was, well, what other method could God use to communicate? I mean, what is better than literature? And to that, I would say, no man-made method is much better than literature, or possibly face-to-face conversation might be. But humans can't use a method to communicate better than that. But God is God. And so could he not? I mean, clearly he didn't mind that things were going to be misinterpreted by using that method, because God was perfectly capable of devising some method that didn't interfere with free will, that communicated his message perfectly, but he didn't do that.
I think that they would say to that, well, but God had to do that because he needs to preserve our free will. To which I don't understand that, because if God was able to perfectly communicate his message to us, that doesn't mean that we have to accept that message. We still have the free will to reject it.
Yeah, I mean, David communed with God and he still disobeyed God all the time.
So it's like God could directly beam into our heads his perfect message and we could still deny it.
Right.
So that argument doesn't make sense either. And another big thing for me was learning that a lot of the apologetics I learned as a kid just weren't up to snuff. I remember being taught that one thing that Josh Feuerstein does, where he he
draws a circle and says, in this circle is all things that are, all possible knowledge. And then this little tiny circle inside is your knowledge. This is all the things you know. Do you agree that this is an accurate representation? Any reasonable person's going to say, yeah, I know almost nothing at all. And then he says, well, isn't it possible that God lies somewhere in this possible knowledge and outside of yours? Therefore, God exists.
And as a kid, I was like, wow, that's such a convincing argument. But now I'm like, but you can use that exact argument for literally anything.
Like unicorns and leprechauns.
Yeah, so if that's your reasoning to believe in God, then that means you need to believe in an infinite amount of gods and an infinite amount of
anything.
Of anything, yeah. Also, as a kid, I was taught that we can know Christianity is true because the Bible has been printed more than any other book, or it has existed more than any other book. So therefore, Christianity must be true. And I've realized that how does that prove anything? But I was taught that that's a reason to believe in Christianity. And I was also taught C.S. Lewis's, like, Jesus either was a liar, lunatic, or Lord, and we know that he was a liar, and we know that he wasn't a lunatic, so therefore he must be a Lord, which doesn't make sense because that isn't accounting for people misremembering things or writing things down incorrectly.
Basically, there's another L that you should consider, and that's legend.
Yeah. These were all things that I was considering over a period of several years. And it wasn't just limited to these things. There was also other things I thought about too. But here, those are some of the things that I can remember. And it is true that the reason that I started questioning a lot of these things was because you were, and that kind of prompted me to look into things for myself too. But that's not to say I did that because I felt like I had to, or I was trying to come to the same conclusions as you. It's just you started questioning your faith, and I was like, oh, maybe I should question my faith too. That's probably an important thing for me to reanalyze that and make sure that I know what I believe is true.
Yeah.
And so that's how that got started.
Right. You didn't copy my homework. You just saw that I was doing homework, and you're like, oh, maybe it's responsible for me to do that too.
Yeah.
Now, a year and 2 months, I believe, after I started my channel, I was at like 25,000 subscribers, and I was getting to a point where if I really hit it hard, I could do it full time. So I decided that I wanted to do this full time. I'd actually already been in a social media position, like an office job, so that I could put that on my resume, and it would also give me time to figure out how social media worked better and how to do better with my marketing. So decided to go full time, and that meant that we really needed to tell family, and we thought, after we tell the rest of the family, we should just go ahead and make it public, because if I'm doing this for my job, then people are going to figure it out.
Yeah, which some people did figure it out before we told them, which is fine.
Yeah. We told everyone that I was an atheist, and as far as you...
I think around that time I was saying I was just not a Christian.
Yeah. While this happened over a longer period of time than the first time I ever came out to people, it was a much less eventful process. There was not as much vitriol or arguing. It was really like, oh, okay, like, you're adults, you can make that decision, and obviously we disagree, but whatever, like, we still love you. And as far as friends go, it did make some friendships more difficult and strained and distant, but for the most part, people said, oh, well, we're Christian, so we don't agree with you, but we still love you and care about you.
We don't care what you guys believe.
Yeah, like, we still want to be friends with you. And we were very happy to hear that.
We were very fortunate that most of the people in our lives reacted in a very healthy and respectful manner, which is not the typical case for a lot of people that come out of Christianity.
Yeah, especially evangelicalism like we did. Several months after that, right before the pandemic hit, we decided that we wanted to move to Austin, Texas. So that's where we are now. We're happy being in a more progressive place. Yeah. But that's really, not the end of our story, but as far as this goes, that's up to now. So how did this overall affect our relationship? I don't feel like it affected how we acted toward each other.
No.
Throughout the whole thing, we treated each other the same way that we did before and the same way that we do now. Really, the pressure was, like we said, managing relationships and pressures and expectations from other people, not from each other.
Yeah, and even when we were Christians, we didn't center our marriage around Christ. We kind of centered it around
and that's why
open communication.
Around open communication and empathy and unconditional love. Oh, that's why you're not a Christian anymore. It should have been Jesus instead.
And that's still what we center our relationship around now. We still center it around, communication, honesty, sharing interests with each other, the fact that we make each other better people.
Yeah.
We don't center it around the fact that we're both non-religious. That's not central to our relationship.
Going through the challenge of coming out of evangelical Christianity, not exactly at the same time, but still together, I think made us much stronger. It was a challenge that we had to overcome together, and we realized that if we didn't band together to overcome it, then it would destroy both of us. I mean, I didn't want to not be with you, and I knew that if we got separated, both of our lives would have probably sucked quite a bit.
And that would have been the case if we had been non-religious and were converting or in that process of converting to a religion. It was the growing and finding truth together that bonded us together,
right.
Not being atheists.
Yeah. I actually look at that time as more foundational to our relationship now than the time before we were married. And not because of, it was us becoming our true selves or something. Yeah. It doesn't have to do with the conclusions that we reached at all.
Yeah.
It just has to do with the struggle, us overcoming something that was a really big obstacle to our happiness. We did that together. And in a way, in exploring these things, again, not because of the conclusions, but because of the process, we kind of grew up together. Mm-hmm. We grew up spiritually, intellectually, in the way that we communicate and have relationships with other people. So we went through some very intense formative years together. And so for me, that's really foundational to our relationship now.
Yeah. And I think going through all of that, I think we know now that if we were to face future struggles together, that we can get through it because we've gotten through really tough things together already.
Absolutely. And with that, thank you guys for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic.
And I've been Taylor of the Antibot.
If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. Thank you to my patrons for their constant love and support making this video possible. As always, there are links in the description to some resources if you are an apostate in need and you need to find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.